Now, how confident are you about spelling words like definitely, separate and necessary? Well, according to a study by the charity MenCap, a third of us struggle to spell them correctly, with teenagers and those in their early 20s the worst offenders.
It's thought that the use of spell check is damaging our ability to get words right on our own. Joining us is Ben Medlock, the co-founder and CTO of SwiftKey, a new auto-predictive service. And in a moment, we'll be speaking to phonics expert Katie Ivans as well. Ben, how important is spelling? We've got spell check on our computers, we've got predictive text on our phones. Do we need to know how to spell anymore?
I think it's important for kids to learn how to spell, absolutely. But at SwiftKey, what we have is this brand new style of predictive text technology. And what it does is capture the way people use language and actually helps you to be creative. And what we would say from our business perspective is that actually you have to use technology to give people a way to be creative. And so you honour the fact that you need to learn how to spell, but you also help people to express themselves.
So rather than worrying about the accuracy of the spelling of every word, you can think more about what it is you're trying to say.
I think that's exactly right, yeah. And that's what we want to help people to do, to communicate faster and more easily.
I guess the problem is with all of these shortcuts, people will be lazy, kids will be lazy. I guess it was like the argument when we were at school when calculators became really common. Should they be allowed or not? Because then you would stop doing mental arithmetic. It's the same argument, I guess, for spelling, that actually, why will you bother if you don't need to?
Yeah, and I think the calculator analogy is a good one. I think it's really important for teachers to help kids to know how to spell. This is part of our heritage, you know, this use of language. But at the same time, we should be using technology to help people be more creative.
Katie Ivans has joined us. Katie, hello to you. This is the future. We've got the technology there, so why shouldn't we just embrace it? Why do we need to learn how to spell?
Oh, let's embrace the technology, certainly. But I agree with you. Children, of course, should be taught to spell. And if they're taught to read by a really good method, by a really good version, for example, of the synthetic phonics method, they learn to spell simultaneously because they're learning about how words are built up. And in fact, all children should be able to read independently after 1 year of full-time schooling. That is perfectly possible. I help to run a charity, and we teach children to Saturday morning school, and we find that our children, they're aged 5 to 12, their reading ages improve by over a year in just 20 hours teaching. So in the first school year, all children, honestly, should at the end of that year be able to read and spell independently. But then it shouldn't stop there. It should go on throughout their schooling, and when they move on to learning subjects, always their spelling should be taught, corrected, and it should go on and on.
But it doesn't, though, does it? I think that's part of the problem. There are spelling tests. When I was a kid, we had spelling tests every week.
Yes, yes.
And those words that we just mentioned there, definite, necessary, they're words that actually sometimes I think about, but I do know how to spell them.
Exactly. And probably when you do it, you sound in your mind, you say definite or definite. Yes. Or it's almost like definite, isn't it? Necessary, and you sort of visualise it in your mind. And it all goes back to the early days when you learnt it.
It's not just kids, though, is it? Because according to this research, it's adults too. 1 in 5 adults who took a spelling test of 5 questions got full marks. 4 out of 5 didn't get all of those questions right. How much do you think things like texting and Twitter, for example, where we've got to squeeze what we want to say into 140 characters so we make shortcuts, how much of a factor is that, Ben?
I think people who build technology have an obligation to do so in such a way that respects the heritage that we have in terms of language. And I think there is inherently both a downside and a plus side. But I think what you see with the use of Twitter is if we can encourage kids to express themselves in a way that makes sense, in a way that honours that tradition, then actually it's a really positive thing, potentially.
Katie, are we too tolerant about spelling mistakes in things like Twitter and text messaging?
How many emails do you get from people that are misspelled? There are so many, you can't sort of correct them, so your spelling is no good. But I would just add another thing. Computers are introduced into classrooms much too early. And the whole idea of using spell checks is introduced much too early. And again, it's going back to your calculator argument.
To become computer literate at an early age.
They've got plenty of time. They've got years and years to become computer literate. Many of them have computers at home.
They want to be computer literate. I've got a 4-year-old who wants to be on the computer because they want to be doing games. They want to have the iPad. So you almost can't fight the changes, can you?
Yes, but the schools don't have to have computers in every classroom. They really don't. They could have a computer holiday when they go to school. And they can easily catch up later with becoming computer literate. There's years and years of it.
Is technology coming in too soon, or does it aid education, do you think, then?
I think technology has the potential to aid education greatly, but I would actually agree that it needs to be introduced at the right time and in the right measure. And I think overall, my message would be that there's huge potential for the use of particularly emerging technologies to help with language.
Sarah mentioned that people in their 20s don't know how to spell. Now, we all know how important a CV is, especially at this time. But do people realise that a spelling mistake on a CV can be fatal? My husband gets CVs, and part of the jobs that he advertised for, spelling is crucial. He gets CVs where there's spelling mistakes everywhere. They're not going to get an interview. Why don't people realise that?
And often you can see they've used the spell check, but spell check has come up with the wrong word. You know,
Yeah,
that is very common. No, each child has got to be taught, as they're being taught to read independently, they must be taught how to spell independently and to go on learning spelling as you go on in life.
Casey.
It has been. But I mean, the government are now introducing penalties in the GCSE exams for misspellings and wrong use of grammar.
Is that the right approach?
Yes, definitely. I mean, if you don't spell it right and your grammar isn't right, you should lose marks. Of course you should.
I think there's this idea of nudging people towards using language more effectively. And I think what I'd like to see technology being used for is in that sphere. So rather than telling kids they have to abide by these grammatical rules, finding ways through technology to encourage them to use language expressively, creatively and effectively.
That'd be lovely. But do they need to be taught the grammar in the first place? Again, that should be taught systematically and simply and directly.
Yes, and if we can't spell, what hope do we have for grammar?
Sorry?
Yeah.
If we can't spell, what hope do we have for our grammar?
Well, again, it has to be taught explicitly and simply and systematically and straightforwardly. And it has to be taught and reinforced all the way through their education.
So a combination of technology and education.
Sure.
I think this is right. Yeah.
Why not?
Agreement all round.
Ben and Katie, thank you.